Thank you, everybody. So yeah, really interesting that our research did show that there are upwards of 41% of people are really considering um, leaving their organization this year. So it's an actually huge number, especially for HR folks, because it means there's potentially a lot more recruitment needed and a lot more actual work needed to find talent, replace talent. And I am curious, and feel free to write it in chat. Are you starting to experience this? I know there were some clients that I've worked with in North America where this was really, really happening for them. So I'm just curious, is that starting to happen for you? And just feel free to put it in chat if this is something that's coming up or occurring. Much higher than usual. Nicola, would you like to come off of mute and just tell us a little bit about what you're experiencing?
Yeah, happy to. We usually see around sort of 12-13% attrition across the board this time of year, pandemic aside. But what we're experiencing in some areas of business is as high as 20%, which is quite high for our industry. And we've got some growth targets as well, but we're just not able to replace the people that are leaving, unfortunately. So we're not able to achieve those growth targets.
Wow. Yeah, it's very, very challenging. And as a strategic partner in terms of the talent inside the organization, it really can double or triple the amount of work that needs to get done. I am curious in terms of why people are exiting. Has there been any particular theme, or is it related to the hybrid environment?
What we're seeing through exit survey data, which isn't everyone, it's those that volunteer to offer that information, it's a combination of salary, also lack of career development, perceived lack of development, and line manager capability. I imagine a lot of organizations are finding this challenging at the moment, where our people managers, there's a lot expected of them to do their actual job. And the majority of our people managers are technical experts, but there's a big demand as a result of the pandemic, people working remotely to invest more time in people, and that's not happening in the most effective way.
Yeah, that dual role they have as a line manager, the complexity of having to get things done today and be very focused, and then constantly looking into the future, both from a talent perspective and a workload perspective. It's very challenging. A lot of people were promoted into those roles to get the tasks done, and because that's what they're really good at. And then this other career development piece, which is such a hot topic and such in demand by employees these days, it almost feels like there's no time for it. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is exactly what our research is showing. And what you're experiencing is very much a global situation in everywhere around the world. From what I've been when talking to clients, it's very, very common. All right, so let's talk about this hybrid environment a little bit. We talk about, this is one of the quotes from the research that our company just did. There's a clear need for businesses to focus on strengthening company culture, relationships, engagement, and particularly to maintain engagement in non-managerial staff. This is one of the big things that showed up in the research, is this disconnect between how the frontline employees are seeing their experience with leadership during the pandemic and how leaders are feeling. Leaders are definitely feeling much better about things, and the frontline employees are kind of like, I'm not so sure about my leader in this whole pandemic, and how they've handled things and how they're helping or being empathetic or supportive. And the corporate culture can be such an interesting thing around how do we do this and maintain the culture in a hybrid and or entirely remote situation, because it is different. It changes the culture. So this is one of the things that showed up in the research that we did. And one of the things that I am curious about is when we talk about the COVID and the return to work. It's such a varied term, but we really did some research around the stages of COVID. So stage one on the far left-hand side, of course, is completely closed. Everything's shut down. People are working remotely. And that's assuming you're in an industry where that was even possible. Stage 2, mandatory work from home when we were told to go home. For me, that was March 11th, 2020. That was a specific day that we had to go do that. Stage 3, work from home, strongly encouraged, where you could go in a little bit, but people really were around, more supported around staying at home still. Stage 4, soft opening, where people could go in every now and again. There were possibilities to go in, usually a lot of rules in place around that. Stage 5, open with restrictions, maybe only a couple of days a week, or you're swapping in and out, or you can't be in the office. If somebody's singing in the cubicle or desk next to you, they have to be a certain distance away, or a certain percentage of the population can be in. And then stage 6, fully reopened, everybody's back in the office and fully on site as an opportunity. So with your organizations, where are you? Which stage, according to this chart, do you see yourself? What are you experiencing? And what can be really interesting, you can write that in chat, you can use your annotation tools, and lots of stage 4, lots of soft openings, stage 6. Oh, yeah. It is really interesting to see where people are. And even within the same company, different locations could have very different situations in terms of what stage they're at, which means that for a manager, really important to recognize that we're not all in the same spot. Different parts of the world are in very different experiences with COVID and the pandemic and the local laws and regulations than other parts of the company. Oh, yeah. So Alan, between 4 and 6 globally, again, not every location is in the same spot. And some from 3 and 4. Jillian, yours is still from 3 and 4. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Jillian, if you want to come off of mute.
Yeah, well, I'm in Dublin in Ireland, and we were actually an essential service. So we've always been encouraging people to work from home. But now we are having sort of a soft opening, but we are encouraging people, strongly encouraging them to stay at home and only come in for meetings with your team, as it were, rather than people individually coming in. We're trying to show that the office is more of a hub than a place you go to work, because you can work anywhere. Work is not a destination. So that's what we're finding. But it was very interesting what you said earlier, that people came in and realized that they get more work done at home. So what we found is that people aren't coming in because they realize that they can't socialize the way they want to. So it's better off if we stay at home. That's what we're finding.
Yeah, that's a very interesting dynamic. Very interesting dynamic. And yeah, it's definitely changing the way people work and the way things get done.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Oh, I just have to turn off my camera for 1 second. Sorry, I was having some technical issues happening here. So hopefully we're back up and running. We also did some research with Microsoft, and Microsoft did a survey very similar to the one our company did. And they found, similar to what Jillian was just talking about, 54% of survey respondents who chose to return to the office in stage 4. They said, yeah, I definitely want to come back. I want to be with my colleagues. I want to get back into the office. But they actually are only spending about 25% of their time there. So while they said yes, they're really only going in for about a day a week. And we were curious about why is that happening? The research shows that 57% say they can't wait to see their colleagues. And it would be great if people looked at work as a hub and a place to go to see the team members. But 42% were really very anxious about returning to the office for health reasons and for any other number of reasons. So this research, while done in July, you can start to see that now that we're in November, even between July and November, the world has changed dramatically in terms of what's happening at a local level in terms of returning to work and the pandemic and vaccinations. So all of that is affecting things dramatically. We did some research with Gartner, and Gartner really came out with this piece around if you are going to have a hybrid environment in your organization, there's some things from the HR and business side that's a really important perspective to look at. One is what are the economics around the hybrid environment and what variety of that? There's so many options around what you're actually going to do. So the economics is there has to be a tangible benefit to going hybrid. Jillian just talked about work, the office not being a destination, being more of a hub. It's a very different perspective than how organizations used to think about the office. The office was the real estate, it was the physical presence, it was the location, and that has shifted very strongly for a lot of companies. We also have to think a lot about the employee experience of hybrid workers. What do they need to consider? The impact on the employee, their goal setting, performance, how they're communicated with, how they collaborate, how to use a collaboration, possibly tools or apps or coming into the office for actual collaboration opportunities. And then, of course, we have to enable both the physical locations and the physical workspaces that we have, as well as the roles and workflows. A lot of organizations are starting to move to this results only work environment. So they're not really fixated on the time of day that somebody's working. They're really much more focused on the work getting done and the employee choosing what time of day works best for them. So when you think about your organization and your role as HR practitioners, these are things that you are probably working with and experiencing and having to communicate out to leaders inside your company. And then it's always good to pause and think, how's my organization doing with this? Have we really talked about the economics? Have we really worked out the experience for employees? And then what have we done to enable to make all of this happen? And it's coming at us very quickly. And sometimes it just feels like there's so much to get done and there isn't time to slow down and plan for some of this. Another little hybrid minute, what percentage of employees are likely to make a career pivot or transition in the next year? So not necessarily thinking about leaving, but possibly taking on a new role or transitioning into something completely different. What do you think our survey results showed up here? And feel free to use the chat. "38, 27, 27. Yeah, it again is actually the highest number. It's 38%. And in particular, it was the younger generations who were really looking to make this career pivot. And I mean, the youngest generation in the workplace. During the time of the pandemic, an awful lot of the younger generations, the Gen Zs as they're being labeled, went back to school or went to learn different things or have been doing a certain job and thought, well, you know, now that I'm home so much, I can actually do some other education. And that seemed to happen a lot. So now they're looking to move slightly into something else. And a lot of that is influenced by their ability to be flexible, have flexible work options, to be able to work globally, to be able to work remotely, and to have a different kind of balance in their lives. All right. Realities of your workplace. So I want you to think about, you know, what benefits did you personally experience as a people leader working virtually? So if you had the opportunity to be completely remote and to work virtually, what did you experience that was a benefit to you? How did that work out well for you? And you can write that in chat. You can write on the screen, whatever works for you. So was it not needing to commute, no long commute? I know, that's a big one. Balance between work and private life, no commute, being able to be human. Oh, nice. Better work-life balance. Yeah, the commute is a very popular one. Um, Alan, I'm just wondering if you'll come off of mute a little bit and tell us about your comment.
Aye, it's partially about being a people watcher and being nosy, but you get immersed into people's living situations, so it becomes a little bit more human. You know, them sitting in a home office or sitting at the bottom of the garden, and so it adds an extra dimension than just the person that sits opposite you in the office. Part of the challenge for managers then is, how do you then engage in different ways? So you're kind of opened up to say, oh, it's okay, there's two children running in the background or the dog's barking, that's okay. So it's creating an air of acceptability as well in terms of people's lives and respecting it.
Yeah, the statistics show that it's very high, the number of us who've had the opportunity to meet people's spouses, pets, children, all sorts of things during the pandemic, and it does make them more human. You do get to know them a little differently and have a different experience than you would with somebody in the office. It also was very interesting that in the space of Zoom meetings or WebEx or whatever platform you're using, everybody has the same amount of real estate. So on a Zoom call, you know, we all have that rectangle and we're all exactly the same size in terms of the space we have. And it was hard to tell who the boss was. There's no hierarchy in Zoom. So it was an interesting thing to get to experience people that way too. So people that maybe were remote before, now everybody's remote. So it equalized a lot. And that can really help with team dynamics. I have one client I do a lot of work with, and he was very excited about everybody going remote because when his team was together in the office, they used to bicker and complain a lot. And so there was always this constant tension. And as soon as they started working from home, that stopped. It stopped completely. And so he said he never wanted them to come back to the office again because it was better having them work from home. That was his big aha moment, is like, no, these people are better off when they don't see each other. And then they focus on the work. So there are some interesting things that we think about when we work virtually. And I am going to try, I'm just going to check in. Jovin, how many people in total are 33? Okay, so just so you know, we are going to do a breakout group discussion in a couple of slides. And I just want you to know, we'll put you into small groups of 4 because we're a smaller group in this session. I think we can give you an opportunity to chat with each other, which will be really nice. So that'll come up in just a minute or 2. But when we talk about working virtually, some of the benefits that we typically hear is reduced travel time, no commute, the flexibility. I saw, I think it was Lisa had a note in there about being able to work out more because you're at home and you don't have to drag all your gym stuff to the office and then to the gym. You just go outside or work out inside. A lot of people had increased job satisfaction. They actually felt better about their productivity, both personally and as a team. Because of the leveling of the playing field, you could recruit team members from a diverse global pool because when things are remote, there's different people you can invite in, different business continuity, a lot. So there was a very recent study done by McKinsey Consulting that showed there's a lot of reports coming out that businesses propelled into the virtual future and the technology future by about 5 years. So what a company normally would take them 5 years to achieve in terms of working remotely, that companies did that within the first 6 months of the pandemic. The McKinsey study that just came out indicated that they found, their research showed that companies propelled 7.5 years into the future in the first 11 days of the pandemic. And that was to maintain business continuity. So if you think about your organization of where it was, say the beginning of March of 2020, and then where it was in the end of March or the end of April even, it probably was in a significant different place technology-wise than where it had started. So that McKinsey report actually shows just how challenging this has been, the speed of change, the pace that we're working at. It's hard to keep up to all of that. but it was all for the sake of business continuity. And of course, the other big thing around working virtually is the time to get to know team members on a more personal level, which Alan just talked about. So we are going to go into a breakout room, and hopefully there's still a few people here, and we're going to put you in groups of 4. But I'd love you to have a chat with these other people that you probably don't know. So take a minute and say hi. And I really want you to think about, what was your best leadership day in the last 3 months? What did you love about that day, and how can you repeat it? What good things have you experienced in this? Oh, I see people are dropping off. What good things did you experience that you'd really like to bring forward as your organization goes forward into this more hybrid type of environment? So good to see you. So I am curious about some of you. What did you talk about in your breakout groups in terms of your best days? Lisa, I'm going to come to you. What did you have a chance to chat about?
Hi, Carol. Thanks for today's session. I was in the breakout room with Richard, and we were talking about kind of the importance of being in the office. And I mentioned that on a bi-weekly basis, we're meeting as a team. So we have a soft opening, probably 1 to 2 days on average. But what we have agreed in principle as a HR team is that we will meet every other week in person to have that team meeting. And it's the personal introduction. I mentioned to Richard that when you have the Teams call, it tends to be a case of you go straight into business. What's the purpose of that call? And you kind of forget to ask, how are you? How was your weekend? How are things at home? So yeah, they're kind of the key benefits of us rejoining as a group, and also just using that time more effectively.
It's so interesting that you talk about the fact that when we're in teams, we get very efficient about making the time, about the meeting. But when you're back to back to back every day and there's no break in meetings, it's exhausting. And then you, at the end of the day, like, did I connect with anybody? Did I actually ask anybody, how are they? Are they okay? Because it's just work. So that's a really nice thing to remind ourselves when we get together, is that we get to actually talk to each other. Great tip. Nice. Nicola, what about you? What did you talk about in your group? I caught you by surprise there.
That's good. I was with Svetlana and Phoebe. Unfortunately, Phoebe doesn't have audio, so we weren't able to speak with them. But yeah, we both reflected on how challenging it's been being virtual and not having that in-person connection. Certainly from my perspective, I found it quite transactional with my team. And I think, to Lisa's point, it's just sort of getting straight to the point. And usually I would get the team together at least once a quarter to have a planned session, celebrating what we've achieved, but then looking ahead and planning for what's coming up. And that's been missed. And you use the word connection, and I think that's what I'd like to have more of that. So when reflecting on what the best experience has been, it hasn't recently, but that's prompted me now to make a commitment to bringing the team together, even if it is virtually, just to have that opportunity to connect and spend some time with each other.
It's such a great insight around, wait a minute, we need a good moment. Let's plan for that. So, yes. Because it is so hard. There's so much going on, and we haven't really had a chance to pause and take a breath sometimes, because the pace is relentless. And in HR, it never stops in HR, because and I am curious, and from the HR perspective, have some of the other types of things that HR has to deal with diminished a little bit during the pandemic, like behavioral things or conflict things in the office? Have those things gone away a little, and the focus is more on well-being? I'm just curious, from an HR world, has there been any of that? Nobody's saying.
We have had a strong push on being mindful of people's mental well-being. So we've actually ensured that more people within the team are trained and qualified mental health first aiders, and just kind of really pushing that on our employee well-being page on our intranet. In terms of ER issues, yeah, there is a reduced amount of things that are coming up, but they generally tend to be more on kind of performance now, rather than kind of interaction of the team.
Yeah, so interesting, right? It's like, oh, wait a a minute, the things that you have to engage with have changed. And all of the research that's coming out is showing that well-being is the number one issue. And from the perspective of physical well-being, mental well-being, everything that we're hearing from clients is that is a priority to understand people and to be compassionate and empathetic towards people, and to help create a space where people can still bring their best in all of this kind of environment. Nice. Kira, what showed up in your group? Anything to add, or what would you like to add?
Yeah, well, I was with Nika and Sabrina and Alan, and we're all from London to Scotland to Ireland. And we actually had a little chat first, which was nice. So we kind of came towards the end and we realized we hadn't really addressed the question. But there's benefit in that as well, because we're all missing the networking, I think. But I think one of the points that was made was around the Gen Z and the younger generation and how much they're missing the office interaction in particular. So like socializing for young people is so important. And I know when I look back to my early career, going to work was as much for my friends as it was to do a job. So I think for the people who are particularly maybe single or living alone or in that young age bracket where company is really, really important, there's that social element that people are missing. So, and then for other people, as we said earlier, it's saving on the commute, more time to exercise, and that people are actually quite enjoying it. So I think we have to always, and when you're on a Zoom call with a team, it's bearing in mind that everybody is an individual and everybody's coming from a different place. So while you might have your 22-year-old or your 52-year-old, I think it's really just acknowledging that everyone is in a different place and kind of looking out for people. But I think it's really good to recognize, I think in particular that younger Gen Z generation are really missing that whole collegiality of working together in an office.
I feel bad for them in some respects, because if they just came out of university and their last year of university was virtual, and then they come in to join a company, their career, it's also virtual, they're missing out on all that socialization where you grow up a lot. Like as a human, you're in university, it's challenging for you and it's a real growth spurt. And then again, when you start your first career and your first job, there's also that big, just that maturity thing, just that interaction with other people. So yeah, I think there's a lot of folks that will be feeling that a lot. So we'll have to, when we can be social again, which would be so nice, it'll be very important to take advantage of those times. Well, thank you all so much for that. That was great dialogue. So let's move on a little bit and talk a little bit about some things around, and this is just a slide that, we would be talking about what is actually going on inside of your company. And a lot of organizations are in a lot of different space on this. Some companies have a brand new operating model. Jillian, when she spoke earlier about the office being a hub, not a destination anymore, that's an operating model. That's a significant shift. And we need to have this mental agility to be able to handle all of this, because some, ways that things used to get done are actually no longer encouraged or the norm. Lots of flexible work options. Some employees, are identified for hybrid, others are not. The whole topic of mental health and well-being is critical, and that is a global change that is having that's really come to the forefront. Some organizations are really experiencing a lot of turnover. The clients that I've been talking to, I've really seen that a lot in the finance sector, where they're very attached to people coming into the building, into the bank or into the big fancy building. And people are like, no, I can do this from home. I don't need to do this. Feel free to use the annotation tools. I see someone up there doing that. We have inclusion space, encouraged to limit the use of technology. Some companies are saying on the weekends, just turn it off, like just stop, give yourself a break, to really help with some of that mental health and that burnout that we're seeing. Some have invested in more remote tech workers or more technology to help people. People or surveys actually reveal the desire to continue this process, that we have this hybrid or remote. Some companies are really going innovative. In-person conferences are being planned. I am actually part of a project I'm on where we're designing a 3-day residential for a group of leaders. And my heart just kind of skips up a little bit when it's like a residential together. And they are actually all coming together. So that in-person experience and conferences and learning and leadership development, talent development, in some countries and in some regions, that is coming back. And then employees have moved. This is something we've seen in some areas where people have left the big cities and have moved out to the countryside or moved a little further away from the city for health concerns, for the freedom of working remotely. So then if there's a hybrid situation where employees are told you have to be in the office 2 days a week, there could be a risk to lose those people because they chose because of the ability to do their job remotely. So we are starting to see a little bit of that. Yeah, so there's lots going on here. I'm just going to clear the screen and then we will move forward. Another skill testing question for you. Hybrid minute, what percentage of Gen Z, so the youngest population, are looking to move to a job with more flexible working options? 25%, 15%, or 51%? What do you think? Oh, people are learning the theme. It's usually the highest number. And yes, it is 51%. So if you have younger generations in your office, the folks that have just come out of university and have just started their professional career, chances are they are really considering working somewhere where there is a lot of flexible work options. That is very desirable to them. And in particular, they really are interested in working 4 days a week as opposed to 5 days a week. Longer days, but getting the full hours in, just working 4 days so they could have Friday, Saturday, Sunday off as a norm, or maybe Saturday, Sunday, Monday, whichever way it works. But they are really interested in a 4-day work week. I was listening to a podcast the other day in this company. That's what they've decided permanently, that they have a 4-day work week now. And it's very interesting when it comes to shaking up the standard and normal way of doing business. When we talk about being successful in this hybrid environment and how to work really effectively, really important, the connection piece, which we've been talking about, is critical. That ability to connect with your colleagues, with your peers, and to stay connected to the organization. There's also the piece around technology. What have we got in place to actually help people be successful and to work remotely and have good, strong connection points? And then skills and processes. What do we need to do to enable our environments to be very successful in this type of situation? One of the big things that we talk about in the connection space is proximity bias. And this is really a call out for leaders around recognizing that you have to pay attention to who are you communicating with and how are you communicating with them. There is a risk with proximity bias that if you are physically in an office with others, that those people will get more of your time, attention, and information, and possibly opportunities, because you see them a lot and you're interacting with them a lot. And then those folks that are still working more hybrid or more remotely, they're missing out on those opportunities. So from a leader perspective, really important to stay on top of, am I treating everybody the same? Am I giving the same information to those folks that are remote as to those folks that I'm seeing in the office? So the risk of proximity bias is very high. And it is something like that we like to call out to go, wait a minute, am I being deliberate about communicating equally and sharing the information to everyone, whether they're with me on a daily basis or they're actually working remotely. So when it comes to common hybrid leadership challenges, there's challenges that we know in leading individuals and challenges that we know around leading a team. On the screen, there's a lot of information around these types of very typical challenges, you can feel free to use your annotation tool. And again, to go in and say, what are we experiencing as a leader, or maybe things that you're noticing inside of your own organization. Some of these get amplified in a hybrid environment. Sometimes the communication is too little or just not the right kind of communication. There can be a lot of duplication of work. Decision-making authorities can be confusing for people. Not knowing what motivates each person on the team can also be very challenging. And again, it goes back to that piece of knowing your people and knowing what's important to them. Just curious, has anyone noticed any issues around trust? Has there been any trust issues show up around team members working together that were really good in the office connected and now aren't? You can write that in chat or use your hands up symbol and I'll call on you. Richard, did you see anything around trust experience? Has that shown up as an issue or topic in your organization at all?
Yeah, not really. No, it's been generally okay, I would say. I think there's probably a difference where people were working together already in the office and had established good levels of trust. I think that's continued remotely. But where you do have new people that have started and haven't had the opportunity to work in the office before, I think that probably takes a little bit longer to build that trust in some circumstances. And it probably varies a little bit from team to team. But and I think we take a lot for granted where relationships are already well established, how much easier the transition seems a lot more seamless. But some of these things that you take for granted when people are new, you have to really rethink how to sort of establish those things, and trust probably being one of them when working remotely. And that's the way that people have started being introduced to an organization.
Yeah, that whole onboarding piece is so important. And some companies are really good with the onboarding process when it's in person, and when they had to switch to it all being virtual, that can be very challenging. And it doesn't always create the same type of connection. Nice, great insights. Nicola, I saw that you put in chat that your organization went through some redundancies, which created some trust issues with senior leadership. Would you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine a lot of companies experience that when there's a round of redundancies, but this was 12 months ago. We recently did a pulse survey and there's still a lot of mistrust. Any potential change that's on the horizon, people get wary. There was a town hall a couple of weeks ago and a lot of people couldn't get into the town hall and wondered if there was going to be another announcement that there are going to be more redundancies. So that gives an insight into how people are feeling at the moment.
They're nervous, uncomfortable, anxious, all the normal feelings.
Yes.
Right, amplified by a pandemic. So,
indeed.
Right, it makes it very, and especially if it's an organization that doesn't do redundancies as a typical course of business, and it's a new experience for a lot of people, or the first time anything like that's happened in a long time, that can really throw people off. It can put a bit of a spanner into everything. They're all very,
I think I added to that the rationale behind the restructure and therefore redundancies at the time was due to the pandemic. But then the financial performance was more positive than expected. And now we have the challenge that we're not able to recruit quickly enough. And we need more than the number of people that we made redundant this time last year.
Oh dear, right? Yeah. But your organization is not alone. That is definitely happening. I have some clients I was working with, and they're very quiet, but they'll say 2020 was our best year ever, and we let a whole bunch of people go, but now we need them all back. And it's like, so then we're trying to make them come back into the office, but we had our best year and everybody was remote. So it's like, how do you explain all of that? Like, and how do we make decisions to run the business where we're like, no, we need you in the office. And like, you didn't need me last year and we made more money than we've ever made. So it's a very challenging environment to create the narrative. Like, what is the strategic narrative to move forward in this hybrid environment? And it's a challenging place for leaders. It's so funny. This word mindset, I'm always, I think about words a lot and what they mean. Mindset means that you have a particular mindset and it's a position. And sometimes I think we have to let go of that word a little bit and really focus on the need for mental agility, that ability to let go of a mindset and pivot and shift and pivot and shift, because that's almost what's needed more these days. And going, well, we just need to shift our mindset. It's like, no, because then you're just in another mindset. You need to actually stay open to this flexibility. And it's very challenging what a lot of companies are going through and confusing for the people working there. Thank you for that, Nicola. It's a great example. I really appreciate that. So when we have some tips for leading individuals and leading teams, and this speaks to some of the things that we've actually heard about, keep the best for when you can get together. If you can bring your team together in the office, every couple of weeks or for a team function, really make the most out of that time. And again, as we've heard, continue to make time for informal communication and relationship building. Really important to have good communication governance. What are you talking about? Who are you telling it to? How are we going to get things done? Interesting when you have people working remotely, some people who are very highly motivated, you don't always need to check in on them as much. But it is important to check in with people who are a little less motivated or where their abilities aren't as strong. So to keep them, especially if they're new and onboarding and you're just starting to figure them out. When assigning tasks, of course, be clear. Teach team members how to give feedback to everybody, whether virtual or in person. And then, of course, if there's a need to teach people a process for resolving conflict, that too is very important, especially in the virtual environment. We don't want people to hide behind their computers. We actually want them to come out front and have the discussion. That dealing with conflict piece never goes away. But in the virtual environment, it's very easy to turn your camera off and just to go on mute and hide behind a computer, as opposed to connecting and continuing to try and resolve things in a really progressive way, in a healthy way. One of the things that we talk about in terms of whether it's a hybrid environment, a remote team, a hybrid team, a co-located team, when you have team members who are fully engaged, they can usually answer these questions about their work. Do I know what's expected of me? Do I have the materials and equipment needed to be successful? How am I doing? I should be able to answer, am I on track? Am I not on track? Are my coworkers committed to doing high quality work? And can I constantly assess if we're winning or losing? These types of thoughts are really important for leaders to think about when they're developing their teams, whatever kind of dynamic they have around, if we went to your team members, would they be able to answer these questions? So regardless of how or where somebody works on your team members should be able to answer these, and hopefully in a positive way. One of the things we talk about in this session is really around the hybrid minute. Would you prefer to hear you're on mute, or is so-and-so coming in today? What do you think? Richard, I saw you smile when you looked at that. What was your initial reaction?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I would say probably the latter. Just because I think we after such a long time, it's more the kind of craving the in-person connections and the value you get from that, and having been denied that to such an extent with work colleagues, certainly in our case, it's certainly not the norm. So yeah, I think probably it would be that.
Nice. Nicola, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with Richard. I'm sort of, can I say, I'm tired of saying you're on mute. Such a cliche for the pandemic times. That is so-and-so coming in today is a suggestion. Yeah, you're physically in person. So yeah, I'd be in agreement then.
Nice. Kira, what about you?
Yeah, I totally agree with Nicola and Richard. Much more exciting to say is Aoife coming in today than the repetitive. And it is funny what Nicola says. It is part of our COVID language now. You're on mute, and I think it's something we probably always remember. But I think it's lovely to, I look forward to the day when we are back in the office, because we're not in the office yet and won't be for another few months. So I look forward to actually meeting friends and
Right?
Yeah.
I know, it's such an interesting thing around the whole difference in the you're on mute. Do you find some people are really short with that now? You're on mute, like you idiot, versus the gentleness of you're on mute. Like some people are so irritated by it now that they're short with other people. They're not compassionate. Like sometimes we just forget to hit the button. We still need to be kind, but I think that's because some people are a little frustrated and it shows up in that way. One of the other things to keep an eye out. Sorry, go ahead, Nicola.
It's literally, it's a funny story just linked to that I typically put people on mute because they haven't muted themselves and it distorts the experience for others. So I'll go around putting people on mute. So then they'll speak and they're like, I don't remember putting myself on mute. So I have to confess and then say, it was me.
The power that we have. Well, sometimes we have to because there's background noises and things going on. I know. One thing to think about this difference between, you're on mute versus and so coming in today is it can also go a little bit on the negative. If you have a team that's partially remote and partially in the office together, is so-and-so coming in today can almost be a bit of a divide between team members because, again, it's a version of that proximity bias showing up where team members on mute, we're all equal and we're on the screen together versus are they coming in, which could actually start to cause a little bit of a divide between team members. So just a caution around keeping an eye out for that or to listen for that. It's just always a good side and a not so great side. All right, so how do we go forward with all of this? And I know if we were running this session as a normal session, we would have 2 hours. So we are moving through the content a little faster than what we normally would. One of the other research pieces we found in our study was the significant levels of job insecurity. So exactly what Nicola just talked about, when there were redundancies in organizations, that really has had a lasting effect. More so than I think it usually would. They're just amplified by the concerns and stress around the pandemic. And so on top of job insecurity, there is a skepticism about career progression. And we have heard that people are concerned, like what's next for me? What's going on? And that's something that in HR, I mean, I've worked in HR for many years, it's always there. There's always this piece around what's next. Is there a career pathing portal, a plan? Who's helping me decide my next part of my career? But again, this also seems to be a little amplified around people wanting to know how can I move up? What can I move up into? And how am I going to get there? So I'm just curious, is this something that you're also hearing inside of your organizations? Is there more emphasis on career planning or pathing? I just see some of you have your cameras on. Alan, I know you had your camera on before. Are you experiencing this at all?
Yeah, we're definitely being asked more to have pathways or structures or processes, but it's getting people to understand it's not always going to go up. There's not one kind of vertical progression route. So it's about how do you offer them a route, a path to stay within the business without a reward at the end of it, trying to make the connection from that the reward is actually the learning itself. It's difficult.
Yeah, the lateral moves, those opportunities to go across cross-functional teams, all of those sorts of things are great learning opportunities. It isn't always going to go up. There's very few people at the top. There's lots more opportunities a little lower down in the organization. And then you also get a better understanding of the company. It's just whether or not people are interested to pursue that. That's definitely something that the research is showing that people are interested in and talking a lot more about. That's why they're also looking to move around potentially to do that. Richard, I think you came off of mute there.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's something that we're really struggling with, I think, to some extent. So we have good competency frameworks, leadership management competencies. We're clear about what we should be measuring, objectives, etc. And yet how we then apply that when we don't get to interact with people in the way that we have previously, and how we get to see the development of team members and how they've progressed across a period of time is really difficult to kind of translate those tools that we were using and that were evolved in one environment and for one purpose, and now we're using them in a different context, and how we can make meaningful and accurate assessments about individuals' competency or skills development in that period of time, and obviously the ability for people to have those opportunities. Because if, for example, we have lots of consultants in our business and part of their development is going to meetings with clients and going with a senior person, and if they've not been doing that, then have they had the opportunity to develop their skills? So we're really still thinking through how people's development and career progression works in this environment. So it's going to be when we get to our promotions round this year, it's going to be interesting how we make those assessments.
Yeah, that whole idea around the social interaction skill, that competency of connecting with clients, with peers, customers, whatever it happens to be, that's not available to be witnessed these days. And if that's a critical part of success, then it's on, do we wait? Do we find another way to do that? Because it's been a big part of a lot of people's review process, and that's just not there anymore. It's going to be interesting how to find our way through that one. A great example. Okay. Lisa, anything to add around your environment, around career progression?
Carol, I believe the audio is dipping in and out.
Oh, is my audio dipping again?
Slightly, but it is still audible.
I don't know what's happening.
Now it
My
seems to be better.
apologies.
No worries.
All right. Okay, we'll just move on then. So when we talk about actions to take for the employee experience and to create a really great environment, create a plan to empower people for the flexibility, in some cases extreme flexibility. It just depends on what your business is doing. Some businesses will invest in space and technology. I have some clients that I'm working with where they really talk about all of their team meetings are all going to be on Zoom, whether you're in the office or not, so that everybody still has equal status. So then some companies are actually developing what they're calling Zoom rooms, where you go in and plug in and everybody pops up on the screen. Really important to combat digital exhaustion, to recognize that people are just plugged in too much, and they really do need just to get to go outside and breathe some fresh air every now and again, and to encourage that. There is recent research done around 5 types of techno stress, like legitimate stress that's caused by technology. It's real, and that has an impact. Some of us experience some more than others. Prioritize rebuilding social capital. We've been talking a lot about this need to connect, on board, create culture, define the culture, because culture has shifted dramatically with this situation that the world has been in. And then really rethink the employee experience. And you get to compete for the best and diverse talent. So that might not be something anybody wants to give up anytime soon. So this is a breakout activity. We won't be able to go into it just for the sake of time, but really to think about what have you heard today around something you'd like to bring forward into your organization, into your team, back to your company, around what can you do? Is there something you talked about today that would really help create a more high performance hybrid environment for you, for your team members, for your company? And so we have some tips on the screen, and so I'll hear from you in that way of doing this content instead. So there's a lot here, but these are, and in the chat you will find, Joanne did insert the participant guide, so that is in there, so you can go back and download that. But high performing teams, these are some things you can do around ensuring the communication is consistent, set up office as a secure workplace, be empathetic, re-onboard employees in person, cultivate a sense of team purpose. The emotional intelligence piece is critical. Value work being done over where it's done. We do still hear a lot of clients that are talking about, we're telling everybody to come back to work. And then in the next breath, they're going, our turnover rates are really high. So those things are connected. So that requires a different thinking in the leadership of an organization. Learn from the mistakes of others, recognize that people are working even if you can't see them. I think that's such an important thing. Again, just because we can't see people doesn't mean they're not being productive. Critical for leaders to recognize that things are getting done. If there's a performance issue, that's one thing. But if things are getting done, just because you can't see them doesn't mean it's not happening. Really encourage people to partner with HR to ensure that legal requirements are met for remote employees, because there can be so many legal things that show up around salaries and benefits, especially if you have a global population where they work. There can be, of course, be local laws and labor laws that are different from other parts of the world. Organize team workshops on growth mindset, psychological safety. These are great topics for teams to come together and experience together as a group, especially if they're working remotely. Provide regular opportunities for reflection, check in with remote employees more frequently. One of the things that's a nice thing to do is if you are having hybrid meetings where some people are together in the office and some people are remote, go to the remote people first, check in with the people that are on the screen versus the people in the room. That helps break down the risk of the proximity bias. It also helps balance out the voices that are heard so that the people in the room don't dominate the conversation. And then just consider making all team meetings virtual. So these are some tips. What do you think? Is there something here you're like, I'm going to go do that? You can use your annotation tools. You can come off of mute and have a chat. And what stands out for you as something you could put into practice? Team workshops around psychological safety. Opportunities. Oh yeah, nice. Yeah, the workshops are fun, like when you bring people together to talk about these engaging new ways of thinking. All right. Kira, I see you have your thumbs up. What are you thinking when you look at this?
No, actually, I was only going to use that as an annotation tool, and it went into the wrong place. No, I think that's a really good point about checking in with people who are remote as opposed to the people in the room. And I think that really creates a great sense of inclusion. So I was actually just putting a note on that.
That's good. Yeah, no, it creates some balance.
Yeah.
And it also creates this, let's go to them first and let's like deliberately connect. Nice. Anything else for people that you noticing, like what are you going to do? I know there's a number of people that we haven't heard from, but I'm not sure that everybody wants to speak. So I don't like to force people, but anybody else? Kate, would you like to chime in?
Hi, I think one of the things I miss actually is body language, be able to read people's body language. I work in a team that effectively had 70 people in, and I'm very much observe how people react to messages, the way they interact with different people. You can pick up on if things aren't going well. And I miss that because I feel, you get a screen, people reluctant to come on video because they haven't done their makeup or hair or whatever. And therefore you miss that reaction, that gut reaction to how people are feeling about a message. And that makes it harder. It's also, I think you can get so bogged down in your little office at home and you connect by pinging people messages and that you forget about what's happening in the outside world. And again, how that is affecting your team. So when Black Matters happened and everything like that, you weren't necessarily, if it didn't really affect you maybe have missed it a little bit. And actually we have a huge diverse workforce in my team, and actually you could have missed that very easily about how people are feeling that, because effectively when it started it wasn't in the UK, it was America, it's remote, it wasn't affecting us, but actually it was.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. There have been some significant social situations that have happened over the time of the pandemic, besides the pandemic. And I do agree that there is a chance that we do miss things, that we're not paying as much attention to the news because we're overwhelmed by the pandemic news, that we may miss out on other major important events that we need to pay attention to. And it is easy to just do your work and turn all of that other stuff off because it's overwhelming. But then there's the missed opportunity to understand it, to do something about it, to get involved with it. It's a very good point around that we could really create a little bubble for ourselves, and that we may in fact miss out on some of these really significant things that have happened, and that we do need to take into consideration with our companies, with our teammates, with our work, everything like that. That's a good call out, Kate. I really appreciate that. Nicola, I saw you nodding on that one. It looked like that resonated with you.
Yeah, I started typing, Carol. Just, yeah, what Kate was saying there about missing out on significant events, or what was positions that I joined the organisation just at the start of the pandemic, so I hadn't met any of my colleagues, and my manager missed my birthday, and they wouldn't known it was my birthday because we protect data in our organisation. So even your manager doesn't know when your birthday is, and it's only if people are linked to me on LinkedIn they would have known, because I've got my birthday on there. And I was just reflecting on how I felt, because so I made a point then of making sure I knew by asking my team members, when are your birthdays? Because it's important to me that we acknowledge and celebrate them. So
yeah, and it's interesting, like, things like that, those smaller social connections and the larger worldwide global impacts, there's a lot that we could miss out on. And it's been challenging. And sometimes I know there's a lot of people who have friends of mine who've chosen, I'm not watching the news anymore. And it's like, probably still a good idea to watch the news, because there are things happening that we need to pay attention to. But it just tells you the degree to which people are exhausted and very tired about things. Nice. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So let's move forward. I know we only have a few minutes left. So one of the things, there was a study done a little while ago that really looked at people and the interactions that people have. So similar to what we're talking about. The study showed that if you move two people a mere 15 feet apart, so 5 meters apart, and let's say they sat beside each other and now they're no longer sitting beside each other. They're moved, 15 feet, 5 meters, 5 meters apart. They tend to interact as much as 70% less. So that doesn't mean they don't like each other or they've lost interest in each other, but it's just because they're physically separated, they don't interact as frequently. So when we think about what's happened with the pandemic, people have tried to replicate interactions as much as they can virtually. But when we do get back in the office, we are going to have to find a way to physically connect with each other again. So it's such an interesting thing that, I think about when I was in the office, I sat where there were 6 people around me. Of those 6 people, there is only one who I actually engage with regularly because of my work. It's not that I dislike any of those other people. I think about them a lot. I just don't talk to them because my work doesn't require me to interact with them. So when we do get back, we have good Wi-Fi. We're going to need human Wi-Fi. We're going to have to stay connected to each other. So important thing to remember. All right, and just to pull it all together and wrap it up, key takeaways, the hybrid environment, whatever version of that, it's not going away. Lots of companies have been doing hybrid for many, many years. Lehigh Harrison, the company I work for, we're very much a hybrid environment. Globally have been And, you know, this is kind of normal for us to work remotely, to have the option to go into an office whenever we want. If having a hybrid team is new, there's lots of things you can do, step-by-step micro actions that you can take to really build a high-performing, well-connected, sustainable team. And then leaders and teams have to work together to discuss what's working, what isn't, so that you maintain the high quality interactions that you have and the performance that you have. So we have one little slide at the end that I always like to have in these workshops. What's your sticky note for tomorrow or for even later today? If there is one thing you're going to do for yourself, for your team, for your leadership in this hybrid environment, what would that be? And it doesn't have to be some big, huge hero thing. It's just a small interaction piece. So always good to think about that. And that will actually brings us to the end of our time together. So it has a couple of minutes left. Just want to open it up. And if there's anyone has any comments or anything else you'd like to add, then definitely feel free to chime in. Ready to chat, whatever works for you.
Thanks,
Adam.
Carol. It was
you're
yeah, just one thing, but this has been really helpful. So I really appreciate the presentation. I think it's been great, and for me, it's been in many ways very reassuring to listen to others and know that everybody's having similar experiences and challenges. You think sometimes sitting there, are other people are experiencing this, or am I finding it more difficult than others? So knowing that we've got similar challenges and issues, and we're working through the same issues is, although we don't have all of the answers yet, it's just reassuring knowing that there's a group of people that sort of having the same experiences. So that's been really helpful. Thank you. That was my observation.
fantastic. Thanks. Yeah, and the community is always the gift with the purchase. It's always right. Nice. Anyone else, just as we're wrapping up?
Likewise, just to echo what Richard just said, and to say thank you for the resource as well. It's got all the tips in there, so that download that was shared. So I really appreciate that, and lots of takeaways. Thank you. Really appreciate
My pleasure. Absolutely. Great. Barak, anything you want to add as a final word?
Thank you, Carol. Really great session. I was actually thinking about my my sticky note and Nicola's previous point around career paths and how it is reshaped made me think actually what I am noticing is people are craving for career related conversations. Career paths is one thing, but nobody even asked them about what they think about their careers. So for me, that is something I will try to focus on more. And it was great food for thought. Thank you all.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, I just make sure we wrap up on time. Thank you all so much for joining. It was such a pleasure, and hats off to you for all of the challenging work that you've been doing in the HR field during all of this. And we're really happy to be able to offer you this program today.